Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/Tiamaneke.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our daily Iditarod coverage here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can hear all of our episodes on dogworksradio.com. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and you will get all of our episodes as soon as they drop, no matter where you're listening to our podcast. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and all of the rest of them. And I am joined today by my co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. It's raining again here in Los Angeles, and it seems to be raining, or at least warm enough to rain, on parts of the Iditarod Trail today, which is strange because it seems like it was just very, very cold where the race was.
Yeah, it's definitely warming up all over Alaska. We've had quite a bit of melt here already in Willow, and it is a different looking world than it was about a week and a couple of days ago when the big snowstorm rolled in right at the restart.
Right, and in addition to that, not that we want to spend too much time on this, but it's also a very different looking world in terms of all of the things that are being shut down. And I just saw that Anchorage is closing all of the bars and closing restaurants for eat-in meals. They're still open for takeout and delivery, but that's pretty much happening in a lot of cities all over the place. And I think that was my fear when we started talking about whether it might be necessary to stop the race or end the race early, that this would start happening in Alaska as well.
That begs to say that a lot of these folks work in the tourism industry during the off season, and I think that we should mention that here because most people follow these guys during the race, and then that's pretty much it. Maybe some of the diehard fans follow them on Facebook, but a good majority of the Iditarod mushers either work on the glaciers or in a tourism capacity with tours and all of that. And it was just recently announced that all of the cruise ships have been delayed up until July 1st. And I know that Danny Seavey was talking about that on Facebook the other day, and he said that he, in effect, has lost a third of his yearly income because of all the cancellations from the cruises not happening. And this could be a really pivotal thing for a lot of these Iditarod mushers moving forward, especially into next year. Do you agree?
I totally agree. And, it's hard to say we're in an unprecedented period is kind of understating it, because what we're doing is in many parts of the country, essentially almost all business is being shut down. And hopefully that will only be for 2 or 3 weeks, but there's a possibility that it might go on for longer. And, that has ripple effects into everything. And in addition to the direct effects of people losing money from the cruise ships not coming in, there's also the indirect effects of if a lot of people are out of work or are feeling uncertain, they're less willing to spend money. They're less willing to come up to Alaska from outside, and they're less willing to to do things like go on a kennel tour or go on a dog sled run. And so I think that this is going to have a really big effect for a long time, even if, as I think we all hope, this situation resolves itself relatively quickly.
And we've talked a little bit about this in our previous coverage this year, but when folks go out on the Iditarod Trail, they're pretty much unconnected from the real world. They may get some news from a quick family call or, talking in the checkpoints, but otherwise, to a lot of these guys, they have no idea the scope of what's happening out here in the real world. Literally, the world has changed dramatically since the race started, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And, it's not an original thought. A lot of people have been saying this since, in the past few days, but the people are really the mushers are coming back to a world that is so different from what they left just a little over a week ago.
So I don't know if this has a direct connection to what's happening in the world today, but a big sponsor pulled out of the Iditarod. This is the second big sponsor that's pulled out in the last month or so. What is that, and do you know why?
Yeah, so that is Anchorage Dodge, and they have been an Iditarod sponsor for, I believe, 30 years. And the guy who used to own this dealership was a guy named Rod Udd, who was a huge Iditarod fan, and it was, I believe, primarily at his impetus that Anchorage Dodge started being a sponsor and started providing the race with a truck to give the winner every year. And Rod Udd, who was known in the mushing community as Iditarod, died a couple of years ago in 2017. And he had said that, as long as he was around, the dealership was going to keep sponsoring Iditarod. And I want to make it clear that this is the local dealership that is sponsoring it. It's not Dodge as a national brand. This is the local guys in Anchorage. And what happened this afternoon is PETA announced that that they were pulling out, and then a spokesman for the dealership was contacted and said, "Well, I don't know anything about that. As far as I know, we're going to keep sponsoring it." And then the Dodge, the national brand, made a statement that said that the Anchorage dealership was not going to be sponsoring it next year. So I'm not exactly sure what is going on, but it appears right now that they won't be a sponsor next year, although Rob Urbach, who's the new head of Iditarod, said this afternoon that they're not going to address issues about sponsorship in upcoming races until after this race is settled. So it would be a gigantic loss to Iditarod to have this sponsor who's been with the race for so long pull out, especially in light of Alaska Airlines pulling out just a little while ago.
And you had mentioned they give away the truck, and that is a big prize for the Iditarod champion. That is usually worth more than the cash that is given as part of the purse, and that's a huge perk for winning the race. And you will see these winners that are driving around are almost always driving these Dodge or I guess they're only Dodge trucks. I don't think that Chrysler or any others make the truck. But they also, Alex, give away trucks as part of the raffle. And I think that they do that a couple of times a year. I know that they do it during the state fair time. They have a big booth there at the state fair where folks can enter to win one of these trucks for a ticket for $100. And I think that they also do it during Iditarod too. So it's not just one truck that's up for this sponsorship, but several, isn't it?
Right. And I don't know exactly how much money they kick into the race and how much of it is the in-kind donations of the trucks, but it is a lot of money. It is not a small amount of money. And as we've discussed many times, this is a very expensive race to put on because it requires going out into places that are far off the road system, flying tons of equipment and personnel in and out. And, they charge people to enter the race, and they charge people for the banquet, and they charge people for, insider subscriptions and lots of stuff. But my understanding is that doesn't really go all that far in terms of covering the costs of the race. And so the race is really dependent on having these sponsors who are able to kick in money so that the rest of the money that comes in can go to the purse. And my worry is that if, among other things, I'm worried that if there isn't sufficient sponsorship, then the level of prize money is going to fall. And, I'm not sure what effect that will have on people, but I would think that some of the top racers, if the purse falls too far, would think twice about whether it's worth their time to enter a race like Iditarod.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So in other news, we had a couple of veteran Iditarod mushers drop out today. One was Richie Deal. I know we talked about him earlier in our coverage. And then Aaron Peck. And I read a quick blurb about Richie. He said that he dropped out in Unaclete mainly because there was not going to be vets along the trail in some of these checkpoints that closed down for this coronavirus scare. So he decided to do it where he had access to flights in and out and other vet care and that sort of thing. So he sort of pulled the trigger early. What else do you know about Richie? And then we'll get into Aaron.
Yeah, Richie had also been struggling a little bit with his race, and I think that when he speaks up about this and tells the story in a few days, it is likely to be revealed that he was having some dog problems, because he was right in the front. He was right in the top 5 for a lot of the race, and then over the past 2 or 3 days really started falling back. And so it seems likely that he was having some sort of problems with at least a few of his dogs. And my guess is that's coupled with the being afraid that there wouldn't be vets at every place that he was going into might have made the decision for him.
And what do you know about Aaron Peck?
Yeah, I actually just found out about this before we came on the air. And it looks like he made the decision at Shaktoolik. He was at the cabin or the rest area that the village set up in Shaktoolik, and decided that he wasn't able to go on because of his dogs. And I'm not exactly sure what the procedure was, because that's not a manned checkpoint at this point. It's just a resupply area. So it's possible that he may have hit his SOS on his tracker. But in any event, he was evacuated, and he and his dogs were taken back to Unalakleet, where he will be able to get to fly back. And it's interesting too, because ordinarily, if a musher scratches this far down the trail, they would just go into Nome, and they would wait for wait for the teams to come into Nome and wait for the banquet. But because all of the activities in the banquet in Nome have been canceled, people are just evacuating from wherever they are. So I believe Richie is flying back to Anchorage, and Aaron is probably going back to Anchorage as well.
Okay, so what other news do we have for today? We're about 2 days from a finish, so I think that things are progressing as planned. Is that right?
Yeah, it's interesting because we had Thomas Werner run through a cold storm a couple nights ago to take the lead, while a lot of other people, a lot of other teams were holed up at Old Woman Cabin. And now that they are on the coast, the weather has shifted considerably, and it seems to have gotten fairly warm. And during the day today, it was up in the high 30s, which is very warm, and it's not ideal for the dogs to run in temperatures that are that warm. So when teams were crossing the Norton Sound on the ice, there were a couple of them who stopped and kind of took naps in the middle of the day. Brent Sass was one of them. He stopped and he said that his dogs were only going about 4 or 5 miles per hour because the snow was so soft and it was so warm that he really couldn't get them to go any faster. So Brent stopped on the ice and he put out some straw and he closed his eyes and he took a nap, and a bunch of teams came up and passed him. And then he eventually got tired of being out there and woke up and continued on. And I believe Paige Drobny also stopped on the ice for a while. And, the ice is a very tricky spot because it shifts a lot, and there can be overflow, and it's an area that mushers don't like to spend more time on than they need to. And so a lot of people will choose to cross the ice during daylight if that's at all a possibility. But it seems like because of the warm temperature, we might see more teams trying to wait a little bit so that they can cross, if not at night, then when it's at least cooled down and is a little bit colder there.
So what are folks saying about these checkpoints that are no longer checkpoints now? I know yesterday or the day before we were talking about Shaktoolik and how the community came together and, really set something up nice for the folks that are coming in terms of a place to get out of the weather. What is the status now of Nulato Nulato, Caltag, Unalakleet, Elam, Shaktoolik, Koyuk, all of those places along the coast there? Are folks able to go in and out as normal, or is it really a disruption in the race in terms of where? And I'm asking this because you follow the tracker in terms of where people are resting and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So because of this, there, and in general, we've seen a lot of people resting outside of checkpoints. There are a lot of teams that are just taking major rests outside checkpoints. And while that's something that happens every year, it seems the last couple of years we haven't seen that quite as much. Nulato the checkpoint was moved down to the river, but was still manned. Shaktoolik was moved down to the river and not manned. As far as I know, the other checkpoints are all still operating as they would have, but there does seem to be a general sense that they are trying to limit the number of personnel, especially personnel who have been in Anchorage or outside, that are going in and out of these villages. And, as we talked about a few times, the contact with the villages and with the people in the villages is something that a lot of the mushers really love and value a tremendous amount about the race. And it seems that even on the villages where where they're still interacting, that there's a little bit more, hesitation, and maybe it's not as people aren't, throwing themselves into being there and greeting all the mushers in the same way that they have in past years.
And that also includes the volunteers. And we've talked about it on previous years. I don't think we've mentioned it this year, but typically a lot of the volunteers, and including the race judges and the vets and all of that, will kind of roll up shop and then move down the trail, going from one checkpoint to another. Is that happening now, or is it just the essential folks are there? And I say that because I've seen a lot of things on Facebook where a person was scheduled to go to Koyuk or Shaktoolik or somewhere, and they were told not to come. So is it kind of a bare bones staff there in terms of checkers and volunteers and dog team parkers and all that?
It seems to be. And this is all anecdotal because I don't have the numbers, and I don't think anybody really has them at this point. But it definitely seems like the checkpoint staff is a little bit less than it has been in the past, and that they are making a point of not having as many people and really just having anyone who's essential to be going up and down the trail. And that's also true with Nome, and several people who have worked with or worked for some of the teams who were planning to go to Nome were told not to, or the ITC is telling the mushers that they can, I think, only have one handler in Nome, and so people are really being dissuaded from going there, and that's going to make it a very, very different greeting that the mushers get when they finish the race.
Yeah, I don't know if I would want to be there during all of that. We've talked about it many times about how they'll ring the bell or the siren, and people will come out in the middle of the night to greet the mushers. I think it's going to be an eerie feeling, almost a ghost town. What do you think?
Yeah, and I feel bad for the, especially if the person who wins this year, as it seems might very well be the case, is someone who has not won before. Because in the past, when the winner comes in, there are a couple of thousand people on Front Street. And, there will still be people there, but I think it's going to be, 100 people or 200 people rather than thousands.
Yeah, it's definitely different times for sure. So, Alex, before we jump into our Musher Profile of the evening, do you have anything else?
Just that this next period, it looks like Thomas Werner is pretty far ahead. And I think that at the moment he has a lead of about 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours, which is substantial. But as we've seen, it's possible to make up a deficit like that in the last 150 miles or so. And so this race is anything but over. And it is really kind of exciting to see, people like Mitch Seavey and Jesse Royer, who are giving chase and posting really, really good times and really kind of nipping at Werner's heels. So out of the top 10, do you see anybody there that is a surprise to you? They're all very well-known names, but, you see names like Paige Strobney and Ryan Reddington and Brent Sass and Wade Mars. You mentioned Mitch Seavey and Travis Beals, and, of course, the top two. Anybody there that's sort of a dark horse coming into the last couple of hundred miles or so? I would say that probably Ryan Reddington. And that's not anything against Ryan Reddington, because Ryan Reddington is certainly an amazing and very, very well-respected musher. But I don't think that he is someone that casual fans think of as being someone who's in contention to win the race. And right now, he is in sixth place. And I would say that pretty much anyone who's in the top 10 at this point could win this race.
Yeah.
And it would be really exciting if a Reddington were to run.
It would. And I know Dallas Seavey talks about unleashing the monster in that last third of the race. And I wonder if his dad does the same thing.
I would imagine that growing up as a Reddington would bring about, just an amazing cache of stories and tales that most of us would never even imagine had happened. And on the other hand, I would also think that, growing up as a Reddington and, having people always be talking about the father of the Iditarod could be a bit of a burden as well.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting for sure. And like we said yesterday, probably in the middle of the night on Tuesday, the Tuesday to Wednesday night, not meaning tomorrow night, we will see a winner in Nome. All right, let's jump over to our Musher profile of the evening. Another rookie. I think most of our profiles so far this year have been rookies.
Yeah, we had a really nice collection of rookies this year, and it's just kind of fun to dive into and explore them. So our Musher profile tonight is Grayson Bruton, who is 24 years old. He is, I have to say that looking at video and looking at pictures of him makes me feel unbelievably old. Because I know that he's 24 and I know that he's not 16. But you look at some of these pictures of him and you think, oh, this kid is 16. He shouldn't be running in the Iditarod. He's 24. He was born in Oxnard. His family moved to Alaska and he was raised in Willow. His dad was a longtime Iditarod volunteer. And so he started volunteering as well and worked as a runner. And those are the people who go with the dog teams when they start, and they run with the dog teams up to the starting line, and then they wait with them until the countdown, and then let them go. And then he started mushing himself. For the last 4 years, he has worked for Mitch Seavey at the Seavey's Iditarod as a tour guide at the Glacier in Seward, and helped train Mitch's teams. And this year last year he competed in races like the Willow 300, the Copper Basin, the Tustamina 200, and he is this year running Mitch's puppy team. And so he has a team that, when he started, with 14 dogs, 13 2-year-olds, and 1 5-year-old. And it's interesting because we talk a lot about puppy teams, and we talk a lot about rookies and what it means for rookies to run the Iditarod. And this is not to take anything away from Grayson, but he is really running this as part of Mitch Seavey's development of his dogs. And so he's got these 14 dogs. He now has 12. He dropped 2 of them in Rainy Pass, I believe. And he said that all 14 of them are potential leaders. So he is running a lot of different configurations and moving the dogs around a lot and giving all of the dogs a chance to run lead. And the idea is that you get all of these dogs and you give them experience in a long distance race. And none of these dogs have ever run a 1,000-mile race before. And you see which ones really rise to the occasion, which ones are not having a good time and get sent home early. And the entire idea of it is not to come in a certain place, but very strictly to develop these dogs and to run this race for the dogs. Now, of course, you want to also enjoy the scenery and enjoy the the experiences and get a sense of what it's like for you to run these races and go through the steps and the gorge and the farewell burn and all of that. But it's very interesting when you have someone like this who's part of a much larger kennel, that they are literally in service to these dogs. And there was an interview he did with the Insider in Rainy Pass, and he was talking about the 5-year-old dog who has a little bit more experience, but still has never run a 1,000-miler. And he said he's like a great pinch hitter, because if I get into trouble, I can put him in lead, and he has a little bit more experience, so he'll be able to get the team going. And so he is very specifically tasked with getting as many of these dogs to the finish line as he can. And so he is running this team, and so far he seems to be doing really great. He is towards the back. I think the last I checked, he was in, I believe, 47th place. He's doing really good runs, and he seems to be sticking to a very, very good run rest schedule. And I saw a live thing of one of his dog team coming into one of the checkpoints, and they looked really, really good. So it's interesting to me that that not only is this young man doing his first Iditarod, which is going to be a great experience for him, but he's also training what could be the next generation of really superstar CV dogs.
And very quickly, Alex, before we run out of time, you talked about these guys that are running puppy teams or B teams or yearling teams. And in years past, we've seen sort of two camps that folks run these dogs with. Either, number one, they are folks like Grayson who work in the kennel and work on the glaciers and all of that. And then on the other side, you have folks that rent or lease teams from some of these top kennels. We are seeing less and less of that in recent years, aren't we?
It seems like we are. We had a lot of that. I think it peaked probably 2 or 3 years ago, and there just don't seem to be as many of those right now. Perhaps because that is a very, very expensive proposition, and it's expensive to run the Iditarod in any circumstance. But if you're going to lease a team that can run you, I mean, I don't know what the current figures are, but it's a very expensive thing to do.
I've heard anywhere from $20,000 to $70,000 to do that, and that is nothing to sneeze at for sure in terms of economics. But yeah, like you said, it really peaked a few years ago. We had a heck of a lot of those rented teams or leased teams, and sometimes they did very well and sometimes they did not. And I really like to see, especially these young guys and gals that have really put in the effort and have worked with these kennels for several years and really paid their dues, and now they're out there doing their thing. And you talked about the dogs becoming the next generation. Often these guys become the next generation as well. I bet we could go down this list and name off a dozen or more of these folks that have run these puppy teams in years past and then gone on and done very well in the sport after they received their mentorship.
Right. And, we frequently hear about people who will work as a handler for a couple of years, and then they'll start their own kennel and start racing. And, that's one path. And the other path is to just stick with the sort of larger kennel that you're handling for. And when that happens and you get a chance to run the puppy team or the B team in some of these races, it's like the best job perk in the world, I think.
It is, and a great example of that is Martin Busser's Happy Trails kennel, and the protege is running the big dogs this year, and Martin is taking the younger team or the puppy team out there. I think that's a big honor for somebody in those shoes.
It really is, and it's amazing. Martin is kind of an amazing guy in a lot of ways, but for someone to to put his ego out of the equation and say, no, I'll run the slower team. I'll run the team that will be in 45th place instead of the team that's going to be in the top 20.
It's awesome for sure. All right, Alex, we're over time. Anything else before we close?
Just look out for the weather. If it stays so warm, I think we're going to see a little bit of a slowdown at least in the front of the race. And that's where you could see some pretty serious lead changes, I would say.
Very good. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Iditarod 2020 coverage here on Mushing Radio. Be sure to follow us on social media by searching Dogworks Radio, and be sure to check out our website, dogworksradio.com. If you have a fancy for it, you can go listen to our Iditarod coverage from 10 years ago, and some people still do. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.